First tonight to the United States, where the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, has made his first appearance as Kamala Harris's running mate in the presidential race, describing their Republican opponents as weird as hell. They were given a raucous welcome by Democrats in Philadelphia as Kamala Harris introduced her fast-tracked VP, who is a governor, an Army veteran, former teacher and football coach. Mr. Walz appeared emotional at times and wasted no time laying into Donald Trump. For his part, Mr. Trump is defining them both as the most radical left duo in American history, saying there'll never be anything like it and there never will be again.
As governor, he signed the most significant expansion of voting rights in Minnesota in over 50 years. And with Governor Walz's help, when I am president, we are going to finally pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. So Tim is a hunter and a gun owner who believes, as the majority of gun owners do, that we need reasonable gun safety laws in America. So as governor, he expanded background checks and increased penalties for illegal firearm sales. And together, when we win in November, we are finally going to pass universal background checks, red flag laws, and an assault weapons ban. In fact, when you compare his resume shall we, to Trump's running mate, well, some might say it's like a matchup between the varsity team and the JV squad.
And I got to tell you, his running mate shares his dangerous and backward agenda for this country. J.D. Vance literally wrote the foreword for the architect of the Project 2025 agenda. Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on. That's not what middle America is. And I got to tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. You know it, you feel it. These guys are creepy and, yes, just weird as hell. That's what you see. That's what you see. So you know what's out there, so say it with me. We aren't going back. We aren't going back.
Well, what the president has said, and I agree with him, is that most people are voting at the top of the ticket. Now, Tim Walz is a crazy radical, of course. He allowed rioters to burn down Minneapolis, but most people are going to be voting for Kamala Harris or for Donald Trump. I think it was a common sense observation. He said it before I was the pick. He said it after I was the pick, and I think he's absolutely right. Now, I will say that on the vice presidential issue, it's interesting what Tim Walz says about Kamala Harris. Tim Walz is a person, again, who promoted rioters burning down the biggest city in his state. This is a guy who wants to give driver's licenses to illegal aliens. This is a guy who wants to take children away from their parents if those parents don't consent to sex changes for minors. This is a radical human being who comes from the far left wing of the Democrat Party. And what Kamala Harris is telling all of us by selecting Tim Walz is that she bends the knee to the far left of the Democrat Party. She's done it every single time in government. She's done it in who she selected as her VP nominee, and she will do it if the American people give her a promotion to President of the United States. We don't have to guess at what Kamala Harris believes. The fact that she keeps on leaning on the most far-left people in the Democrat Party tells us exactly who she is and what she stands for.
Well, the opposing sides there in America's presidential race ranged against one another. Well, for more on that race to the White House, I'm joined now on the line from London by the US Republican strategist Greg Swenson. Good to see you, Greg. And I know you are, of course, a Republican strategist, as I just mentioned, but I know you're also very down the middle when it comes to objectively assessing developments as a political analyst. So let's start with your political analysis. Who is Tim Walz?
Yeah, it's a great question, Charles, because not a lot of people know Tim and or have heard of him. So, and that's quite natural for vice presidential picks sometimes. And I think you could say the same for J.D. Vance, where, you know, a great percentage, I think it's higher than 25%, did not know J.D. Vance. So that's no big deal. But it's clear that Kamala Harris chose the most progressive left-wing candidate of the 5 or 6 people on the short list. So it's a real clear choice. You know, he's a progressive favorite. So there's very little ambiguity now. By President Trump choosing J.D. Vance, who is really in President Trump's lane in many respects, and then Kamala Harris choosing a progressive, you know, radical leftist, it really shows that there's a choice here, and whether you like, there's very little ambiguity. So I think it's a clear choice, and I'm surprised. I think a lot of people were surprised that she didn't choose Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. That was a real surprise. I mean, you know, Minnesota's not a swing state, even though it's polling closely right now. Between, you know, President Trump's polling much better there than he did in 16 or 20. But I don't think it's a state that he can win. It hasn't voted for a Republican since 1972, since Nixon. And then, you know, you have a radical progressive leftist candidate, a vice presidential candidate, and also the fact that she rejected Shapiro. So she was clearly bullied by the pro-Hamas wing of her party, the progressive left wing of her party. I'm not sure that was wise. And I think that, you know, the criticism is pretty valid. But by choosing Tim Walz, you know, she clearly drew a line in the sand between the moderate wing and the progressive leftist wing of the party.
So, I mean, he, as you said there, and a lot of people agree with that assessment, that he was not the obvious choice for Democrats to be the running mate for Kamala Harris. And just listening to him at that rally, I mean, he seemed like quite a spiky sort of chap.
Yeah, I think he's a gifted politician. You know, look, he's a likable guy. He's got that kind of chummy Midwestern flavor. You know, I just spent a week in Chicago, so I know the Midwest very well. And, you know, and I think he's likable. And so that's the good news. But again, the bad news for them is that he is definitely on the progressive left wing of the party. And so we'll see how, you know, he might do well at Democrat rallies like the one he spoke at today. But I think when, you know, under scrutiny, and perhaps in whether it's in a debate or with some media that isn't, you know, too friendly to him, you know, is how he'll defend his record of letting Minneapolis burn. You know, Kamala Harris was supporting the bail reform in Minnesota and helping people get out of jail, the very few people they caught. So, you know, this is going to be controversial, even though it doesn't sound like it is right now. He seems like a really good guy with a Midwestern appeal, and I get that. And I think you could say the same about J.D. Vance. But as J.D. pointed out, this is really about the Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, less about the vice presidency. You know, he's getting some attention now, but I don't think either candidate is going to move the needle because they're not very different than the top of the ticket candidates. And I think, you know, that's pretty clear by both Trump and Harris picking people who are very much like them.
And what are the polls saying about Kamala Harris at the moment and her chances against Donald Trump? I understand she's about level with Mr. Trump in some polls and ahead in others, with millions of dollars pouring into her campaign coffers.
Yeah, she's done really well with the fundraising. I think a lot of Democrat contributors, donors, were holding back during the controversy with President Biden. So once Biden was pulled, they let let go on and actually wrote checks, a lot of big checks. And so she's done well in the fundraising. She's polling well compared to Biden, but the level that she's at now is only what the level Biden was at before the debate on June 27th. So, this is not, yes, she's definitely picked up some steam and her numbers have risen. The enthusiasm in the party for Kamala is much greater than it was for Biden. Biden's enthusiasm number was 37%, meaning, the 37% of Democrats that were going to vote for him were doing it only because they didn't like Trump, not because they liked Biden. Whereas Kamala's pushing at 80 right now. Now, of course, Trump is at 88 because there's great enthusiasm for President Trump. So it's an interesting metric. She's definitely picked up. But here's the challenge, Charles. She's now, basically even in the national polls, even up slightly in some of the polls over Trump nationally. But that's because the big Democratic states, California, Illinois, New York, are much more excited. So those people are coming out and suggesting they're supporting Kamala Harris. However, in the swing states, which are critical, especially Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Trump is still leading. He's not leading by 5 points in Pennsylvania like he was 2 weeks ago, but he's still leading by 2 or 3. So it's all about the swing states. That's again why I'm surprised she didn't pick Josh Shapiro, who could have helped her carry Pennsylvania. Biden has to win all 3 of those states. Trump only has to win 1.
Kamala Harris. And of course, she is the difference between herself and Trump in some of those places you mentioned is within the sort of the margin of error, isn't it? And I mean, there's still quite a bit of time to go before the election, so it could go either way. But I mean, Mr. Trump has been defining both of them, partly what you've been saying as well, as the most radical left duo in American history. I mean, tell us a little bit more about what he's been saying.
Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate. I can't think of another ticket that was that far to the left. Surely not, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, surely not Obama and Biden. And so, you've got a really progressive ticket, which flies in the face of common sense. Right now, when you're seeing really radical left progressive Democrats losing in their primaries. Cori Bush lost yesterday in a primary fight to a more moderate Democrat. Jamal Bowman in New York lost recently to a more moderate. So the trend and what I would have argued for Kamala if I was asked was, pick someone that's more moderate like Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly, former astronaut who's a senator from Arizona. They're viewed by the electorate as more centrist, whereas instead she doubled down on the progressive left. I think it's from an electoral perspective, it's a mistake. But as you pointed out, Charles, it's still going to be very close. She's within the margin in a couple of those swing states. I think Trump will comfortably win the so-called swing states. I don't even think they're swing states anymore. North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, maybe even Nevada. But I think it's still very close in the 3 Midwestern states.
Great to talk with you, Greg, and thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Greg Swenson is a U.S. Republican strategist who was talking to me on the line there from London.